what I wanted to do this evening was just share with you a bit of insight in terms of where all of this is going. So we've clearly heard about the exciting opportunities that are occurring here in Jersey. But I want to just take a moment and look at, well, what does that mean? What else is coming? And I think maybe, hopefully, to answer a question that was raised down here, what does this mean? What else? It's fantastic having high-speed connectivity, but what else is possible? What else could happen? So I want to try and share a bit of that insight with you. And there's lots to it, and we're going to focus in on a couple of those areas tonight. The first thing I just want to do is actually look at the evolution of the internet. And it's sometimes very interesting because we've come a very long way in a very short period of time. And as we are sat here tonight, sort of looking up at that mountain, thinking about where it's going and what's possible, I think it's also important sometimes just to reflect and look back at the distance that we've travelled to get to where we are. And if we look at the waves of the internet, where we have come from is we've come from this environment of pure connectivity. So there was a couple of years ago, and it wasn't that long ago, when we had that basic connectivity existing, when we had web browsing, we had email. And not long after that, we started to see the networked economy come in. We started to see the online commerce kick in. And interestingly, we're now almost going 360. We're seeing this scenario where we've gone from bricks to clicks and almost back again to bricks. Because you're now seeing online retailers now trying to have a physical high street presence. And an example of that would be someone like eBay. So what eBay are doing, if you're not aware, is they're entering into a pilot with Argos to actually start to provide some of their services through Argos stores. So when you order something, rather than waiting for it to come through the post, you can actually pick it up from an Argos store. So we're beginning to see this evolution, almost 360, and this brick, click, and brick environment come to play. We're arguably in this environment today where we have an immersive society. We're using video, we're really beginning to get to grips with what is possible with that higher speed connectivity. And as a result, we're seeing the adoption and use of cloud services, etc. But where we're going is a place that we like to call the Internet of Everything. And what that starts to do is actually take the concept of connecting both people, process, data, and things together. And you will have heard of the Internet of Things for a long time, and I'll touch on it later on. But the connected fridge is always one. Every time I talk about the subject, everyone talks about when's the connected fridge coming. Well, I'll give you the answer to that question later on, so if you hold with that. But what else is possible? Where else can we actually start to apply this technology? And if we, again, just look at where we are today, there are some big social challenges that we're facing. Across the globe, we're seeing increasing numbers of people, increasing population. We're seeing an aging population, certainly in Western Europe. And all of these are challenges that government and society has to deal with. And we'll cover some of these later on, but I fundamentally believe technology has a way of helping us address those challenges. But before we go into that, I like to have a bit of audience participation. So, no prizes for any of these, but this is a little poll that was run not so long ago. It was actually conducted in Germany, but it does translate literally very well. And it was a question that was posed to a group, a demographic, and it's very important to point out, a demographic of the age of 14 to 29-year-olds. So I'm sure there's a number of you in this audience. If not, if you can think back to when you were in that demographic. But if you were asked that question as a 14 to 29-year-old, I cannot imagine my life without. What would you say was number one? Mobile phone, Facebook, yep, all in the right general direction. So 97% of those that were polled said that they could not live their life without a mobile phone. Now, I think this is very interesting on a number of fronts, and in particular, I think it's interesting, and I'm sure you're doing the same, scanning that line of phones there, thinking, where do I start to come into the connected world? I'm the second one in there. I didn't get the brick phone, but there may be a couple of you that did. But again, the influence technology is having on younger people, on the digital natives that are now growing up in an environment where all they know is being able to access data on the move, being able to speak to people on the move. It is quite frightening, but it's also a fantastic opportunity. Anyone like to guess what came out second? And we've already heard the answer, I think, somewhere. Facebook? You're not far off. You're not far off. So the internet. 84% said they couldn't live their life without the internet. Now, again, interestingly, back in November, I think it was November 2011, United Nations declared access to the internet as a basic human right. Now, I'm just waiting for my 7-year-old to turn around and tell me that I'm depriving him of his basic human rights. But it is interesting quite how quickly, again, technology has started to creep in. And it was touched upon earlier on about the importance of, as we move forward with all of this, of making sure that we don't create a digital divide. Because if we're to benefit from, as a society, in terms of all of this technology, we need to make sure that everyone has access to it. Now, this third one, I'd be very surprised if anyone got, but I also think it's probably one of the most interesting ones as well. Well, when I was 17, it was the number one thing that I was aiming for, and that is a clue in terms of the age. It was a car. So 64% said that they couldn't live their life without a car. Now, certainly when I put myself back into that demographic, that was my number one thing. That was what I was aiming for, and when I got it, that was everything to me, because of what it represented. And what it represented was freedom. It allowed me to meet with friends. It allowed me to socialise. But what the digital natives of today are turning to is technology. They're using technology through the likes of Facebook, through the likes of Skype, and others, to connect with friends. Now, again, this may be down to other elements in terms of costs, etc. But one of the really interesting data points that I read about was that in the US, for the first time ever, in terms of percentage of population, they're actually seeing a decline in the number of people applying for driving licenses. And I believe part of that is down to technology. It is because people are using technology as a way of connecting and collaborating and communicating with friends and family. Now, before I reveal the fourth one, and no one will get this one, unless you've seen this slide before. No one will get this one. I do want to reiterate the demographic. Okay. So remember, it's 14 to 29-year-olds. And the fourth one was my current partner. So only 43% said that they could not live their life without their current partner. Now, clearly, as they grow older, they'll realise the errors of their way. And they won't place a mobile phone over their current partner. But it is interesting, nonetheless, to see how the demographic actually values and relates to technology. So, this is another interesting picture. Anyone recognise it? Exactly. So this is a fairly iconic picture. This is a picture of the Beatles. You can't actually see them there, but it's actually a picture of the crowd. And what the crowd are doing is they're waiting outside Buckingham Palace back in the 60s for the Beatles to turn up to receive their knighthood. And what you have here is a very excited crowd. You have a very keen crowd to get access and visibility of their idols. They're being held back by the police, and they're desperate to see their idols. Let's fast forward to the present day. Now, it's slightly different, or it's in colour for one, but it's slightly different. We've got a crowd again, slightly different demographic, but again, the intent is the same. We've got a crowd that are keen to get access to their idols. And we can argue whether it's right or wrong. But what they're doing is they're queuing outside the Apple Store in Covent Garden, ready for the launch of the iPhone 5S. So this is a group of people that are now very, very excited about what is possible. And if we want to see quite how excited they are, here's an example of someone leaving the store with their said phone. But what this is doing is actually presenting a very interesting challenge or opportunity, depending on which way you want to look at it. Because that gentleman there is walking out with a device that will provide him access to a number of different services, applications, capabilities that he probably won't be able to fulfill when he goes into his professional work environment. He'll be able to download an app simply by pressing a button, armed with a credit card and paying 69p, and having that up and running within maybe 30 seconds, 60 seconds. He'll go into his corporate world and he'll try and do the same, and I suspect it will be a very different experience. And interesting enough, we ran a survey, a report, about 18 months ago now, called the Connected World Report. And we looked at how technology was beginning to influence people's decisions. And one of the things that was very telling that came out of this was the fact that early in career individuals were now beginning to use, as part of their selection criteria, where they went to work, by the way, not who employed them, where they went to work based on the IT capabilities of those organisations. And if you want to get a real proof point in all of that, I spoke with the board recently of a large utility company, and we were talking about the consumerization of IT, and the head of HR wanted to share his experience with me, and I'll just take a second to share it with you. His view was that 5 years ago, when he went round the universities and he talked to the prospective leaders of his business and told them about how exciting it was to work in his industry, and particularly within his business, he was met with a challenge first off. And that challenge was that his industry wasn't seen as particularly exciting. His words, not mine. But they were able to address that, and the number one question that he was getting asked at the time, again, rightly or wrongly, was what's the company car policy, how much do I get paid, things like that. Now these are roles across the spectrum within the business. These aren't IT-related roles. But what he said he's now observing is, 5 years later, is the number one question he's being asked is, what is the IT policy? Can they use iPads? Are they able to work from home? And this is criteria that the future leaders he's trying to attract into the business are now using. And the challenge he's got is that he's not able to deliver that. And we could argue that, well, in today's environment, people should be pleased to even have a job. But the reality is that people that are top talent are top talent. And if they're using that as their criteria as to where to go, then it's something that an organisation needs to at least acknowledge and ideally respond to.